Today, perhaps more than ever, women are being led to believe that the silence of the body is a sign of absence, emptiness, or emotional failure. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if that silence is the soul's first whisper? When a woman chooses, consciously or not, to distance herself from the games of desire and the prisons of superficial affection, something deeper begins to emerge from within her. It is not absence, but presence, not lack, but expansion. Carl Jung would say that all repressed energy finds a new way to manifest, and when the body stops being distracted by immediate pleasure, the soul finally has the space to speak. Have you ever wondered why so many women, after periods of abstinence, report an unexpected spiritual awakening? A heightened sensitivity, more vivid dreams, sharper intuitions. It's not a coincidence. It's a calling. The body, deprived of external touch, begins to turn inward, and it is there, in that long-forgotten territory, that the woman finds parts of herself that had never been seen neither by herself nor by anyone else. This is not just about celibacy. It's about transmutation, about an energy that stops seeking in others what can only be cultivated within. Society, conditioned by a model of constant sexual validation, fears the woman who withdraws because she becomes unpredictable, mysterious, untouchable, and even more so because she begins to see beyond the games, beyond the emotional repetitions, beyond the mask of relationships that imprison more than they free. Jung would call this an encounter with the shadow, a moment when the woman stops seeking to be chosen and begins to choose, not to love in order to be loved, but to love herself with such intensity that everything superficial dissolves on its own. There is a kind of silence that is not emptiness. It is a temple. And when the body comes to a halt, it is because the soul is about to ignite a light that disturbs. A woman who lives without sex or relationships is not dead inside. She may be more alive than ever. What seems like absence is actually an abundance of inner presence. What seems like loneliness is a deep communion with something no passion could ever touch. It is in that space that the archetype of the wild woman awakens, the one who reconnects with her ancestral wisdom, her pure instinct, the feminine that does not need an audience. Can you? Can you feel it? This calling is not for everyone. It is for those who are tired of trading their essence for moments of false connection. It is for those who understand that what they truly seek is not in anyone's bed, but in a radical encounter with themselves. And if you've made it this far, perhaps you are closer to that journey than you think. Yes, the body falls silent, but that is not weakness. It is strength, retreating to become power. And when the soul begins to speak, there is no turning back. Because a woman who has heard her soul will never again settle for the low volume of an ordinary love. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the noise of the world becomes unbearable. Not the outer noise, but the inner murmur of expectations that are not hers, desires she was taught to feel, affections imposed as absolute truths. And it is in that deep exhaustion, almost invisible to others, where the journey back to herself begins. Carl Jung said that everything we deny within ourselves returns as fate. And perhaps that is why when the body chooses silence, it is not a failure. It is a sign that something greater is trying to emerge. The woman who begins to withdraw from the impulses that once guided her, without fully understanding why, is already hearing a silent calling that comes not from the flesh, but from the soul. That woman, even unknowingly, begins to feel a longing without a name. It is not nostalgia for a man, a touch, or a passion at night. It is nostalgia for herself, for a place she has not yet reached, but knows exists. In this context, Abstinence is not a punishment. It is a portal. And by crossing it, she begins what Jung called the process of individuation, a radical path toward wholeness where she leaves behind the projections she cast onto others in order to finally recognize herself. The emptiness that appears is not absence. It is space being prepared for something more authentic to be born. It is in that space that memories begin to ache in a different way, not as open wounds, but as clues to a greater story.
The relationships that passed the nights that ended in tears, the cycles that repeated without explanation, all begin to make sense under a new light because the woman who embraces silence is not retreating from life. She is rewriting her own story from a new perspective. Her inner self begins to observe emotions as symbolic mirrors of an unconscious that had always spoken to her, but which the noise of desire had silenced. Gradually, she discovers that she no longer needs applause or external validation, that her worth is not measured by how much others desire her body, but by how deeply she can hold the presence of her soul in silence. It is at this point that nearly mystical force is born, the force of the woman who no longer needs to be chosen. And this is where the world begins to fear her, because it doesn't know what to do with someone who has stopped begging for love. She becomes whole, and therefore dangerous to everything that still lives in halves. And when that woman begins to realize that her vital energy is not dormant, just withdrawn, she enters a new state of consciousness, a state where there is no rush and no need to prove anything, because the silence of the body is not punishment, it is a language, and that language can only be understood by those brave enough to inhabit their own depths. Jung would call this a reconciliation with the feminine unconscious, a reconnection with ancient symbols buried under centuries of repression, and that reconciliation does not happen through words, but through presence. That woman is just beginning to emerge. But the journey is not gentle. An unease sets in, an invisible anguish that eats away from within. When a woman begins to distance herself from immediate desire, from familiar contact, from the presence of another body beside hers, she also distances herself from everything that once made her feel like she belonged. And what remains at first is a brutal discomfort, as if the world no longer recognizes her existence, as if her absence from the game of desire has made her invisible. Jung would say this is the beginning of the encounter with the shadow, the part of herself she repressed for years, that lived adapted and thirsting for validation, but now refuses to keep pretending. At that point, she begins to wonder if she was wrong to walk away, if she's going crazy, if she's wasting time, youth, and opportunities, because the system screams that a woman's time is short, that she must be in motion, conquering, being desired, fulfilling expectations, and suddenly she's nowhere. She's neither lover nor wife, neither muse nor fiancé. She is only herself, and that hurts more than any abandonment. Abstinence now begins to feel like punishment. But it is not. It is a test, a symbolic journey that only ready souls can endure. Temptations arise, old patterns knock at the door, easy invitations reappear. Everything seems designed to test her, and the cruelest part is that no one around her understands what is happening. Friends question her, family suggests she'd go out more, not isolate herself. But it's not isolation, it's immersion. And not everyone is ready to witness someone diving deep while the rest of the world floats on the surface. Jung saw this as an inevitable stage of individuation, the moment when the ego panics because it is losing control, and the soul subtly begins to take the lead. It is in that silent despair that many give up, returning to old patterns, accepting lukewarm love, convincing themselves that having something is better than nothing. But the woman who stays, even through tears and doubts, is being shaped by something far greater than herself. She's being called to break the cycle. And cycles are not broken by force. They are broken by awareness. The tension she feels is not a sign of error, but of transition. The cocoon tightens before the butterfly is born, and that is what is happening. A new being is being gestated in the darkness of silence. Deep down, she knows it, even if she can't explain it, even if she fears she is too alone, too misunderstood, too profound. There is a voice that does not shout, but insists, a presence that does not show itself, but accompanies. And that presence is the symbol of the archetypal feminine, the anima that Jung described as the bridge between consciousness and mystery. It is with her that the woman begins to converse. And the deeper that internal dialogue grows, the more she understands. Her body is not on pause, it is in ritual. A ritual the modern world has forgotten, but one her soul has always known how to walk. And then something shifts, subtly, almost imperceptibly. A new understanding begins to bloom. What once was restlessness now organizes into deeper questions. Why have I always needed to feel desired to feel alive? Why does another's absence feel so unbearable? What in me still feeds on another's gaze to exist? But the transformed woman no longer accepts relationships as anesthesia. She no longer trades affection for company. And even if that costs her long, silent nights, she knows her body is not in abstinence, it is in protection. It is reserving space for something that comes from the soul, not from lack. The transformation is complete when she realizes she no longer needs to be sought. She is the center, the fire, the revealing light, and when that light turns on, those who cannot handle its intensity walk away, and those who come later will not approach her halfway, because the woman who has crossed through her silence no longer accepts living dimmed. She is no longer available for ordinary relationships because she herself is no longer ordinary. And when the body goes silent, it is the soul that chooses. And the soul, once awakened, never chooses what once wounded it. Then she rises, not as someone returning to the world, but as someone becoming the world. Every step is now conscious, every choice measured not by fear of being alone, but by the value of her own company. The body that once kept quiet now pulses at a new frequency, subtler, deeper, truer. There's no rush to fill emptiness anymore, no desire to fit into spaces too small for her new soul. That what we deny submits us, and what we integrate transforms us. And this woman has finally integrated her absences. She made lack her home. She turned silence into an altar. But there's something new she noticed. She's not waiting for someone to rescue her, because the woman who has crossed through her own darkness no longer needs saving. She rescued herself, and that self-rescue changes everything. She can no longer go back to how things were. What once was need is now choice. What once was compulsion is now discernment. She can love, yes, but she no longer loves from need, but from overflow. And when that love arrives, it won't come to complete her. It will come to accompany her. Her soul is already whole. This new state awakens something profound, a sense of mission, of purpose, of clarity. She understands that her experience wasn't just personal, it was symbolic, that her silenced body represents all those women who are also taught to depend, to distract themselves, to give in. And now she feels the impulse. Be a beacon, not to lead the way, but to light the fire. Because only one who has found herself in the dark can teach others not to fear it. Jung would call this the manifestation of the self, when the soul no longer wants to be accepted, but expressed. Everything she lost along the way, the old loves, the fragile versions of herself, the relationships where she had to shrink to fit, no longer hurts the same. Now every loss sounds like liberation. Every absence feels like an answered prayer, because the woman who went through abstinence of the flesh has found nourishment of the soul. And that nourishment feeds her from within. Nothing from the outside will ever be enough unless it resonates with what already lives inside. And so she prepares not to return to old roles, but to inhabit a new place in the world. A place where her presence is enough, where her voice carries weight, where her silence is sacred. And when her body desires again, it will be by sacred choice, not emotional addiction. When love knocks, it won't find a needy woman. It will find a woman full, complete, ready. And until that happens, she remains steady, not in abstinence, but in vigil. Because now she knows, yes, the body is quiet, but the soul is finally speaking. There are silences that seem cold but hold embers. There are absences that, from the outside, sound like loss, but within are fertile ground. And there are women who, when they retreat from the world, do not extinguish, they ignite on another plane. When the body falls silent, it does not die, it becomes an altar, a sacred space where the soul finally finds the courage to speak. And everything that once seemed like a lack of life now reveals itself as divine presence, gestating a new identity, clearer, rarer, whole. Nothing lived as ever lost. Everything is transmuted. Desire once urgency becomes choice. Pain once a wound becomes a scar of wisdom. The woman who walks through abstinence with awareness is not stepping away from love. She is learning to love from a place where there is no longer hunger, but abundance. And in that quiet abundance, she becomes untouchable. Not because no one can reach her, but because no one can manipulate her anymore. Can you feel the reflection of this path inside yourself? The nameless nostalgia, that discomfort of no longer fitting where you once felt at home, the desire to retreat without knowing exactly why. That is not fragility, it is the first call. Maybe this video didn't find you by accident. Maybe it is the mirror of something that has long pulsed within you, but had not yet been clearly named. And now that it has, something changed. If this journey touched a forgotten part of who you are, allow yourself to continue. Don't put out the spark that's been lit. Share this message with someone who also feels her body has gone quiet but doesn't yet understand why. Leave a comment telling us how this resonated with you. And if you wish to keep walking with us in the same depth and truth, subscribe to the channel. Here, every word is a seed, every silence is soil, and every video a ritual, because in the end, this is what remains. A woman who has learned to hear what the soul whispers when the world is too loud. And that whisper says, "You are not alone. You are awakening."